Montana Territory, late summer of 1873. The wind carried the scent of dust and pine as the sun dipped low behind the Bitterroot Mountains. Tessa Jane Holloway stood ankle-deep in the cold creek, her skirts soaked and heavy. Her hands trembled as she scrubbed the blood from the hem someone else's blood. A day's ride behind her lay the broken wagon, the burned-out trail, and the last of her husband's lies buried beneath it. She had not cried. Not when the outlaws came, not when they left her with nothing but bruises and silence, and not when she found the courage to walk away from the man who had traded her for a bag of silver. But now, with the sky bleeding orange and the forest pressing close, she felt the weight of it all pressing down. A soft crunch of hooves broke through the hush. She turned fast, heart hammering, and met the eyes of a man on horseback. He wore a worn brown coat, dust clinging to the cuffs, and the kind of hat that had seen years of sun. His horse was steady, dark-coated, and calm. The man, tall, lean, a rifle slung behind his saddle, lifted his hand slowly. "I am not here to hurt you," he said, voice deep and even. "Name's Fletcher Rowe. You alone out here?" She hesitated. "Who sent you?" "No one," he said, glancing at the creek, the blood on her dress, the split at her lip. "I was tracking a rustler, found a wrecked wagon a mile back, figured someone might have made it out." "You?" Tessa squared her shoulders. "I made it out," she said, voice tight. "That is all you need to know." Fletcher nodded once. "Fair." He dismounted, slow, careful, like he knew not to make sudden moves. He led his horse to the water and let it drink. Tessa watched him for a moment longer, then turned back to her dress, scrubbing harder than she needed to. "You got anyone waiting on you?" he asked after a while, not looking up. "No." He said nothing for a long moment. "Then you got somewhere to go," her hands stilled. The truth sat bitter in her throat. "No," he scratched his jaw. "There is a homestead about 20 miles east. Mine, got a spare room, clean water, and quiet. I will not ask questions you do not want to answer, just offering you a place to catch your breath." She looked at him again. There was no pity in his face, just calm, steady patience. "You do not know me," she said. "Maybe not, but I know the look of someone who could use a little mercy." She swallowed, throat raw. "I am not a charity case. Did not say you were." The quiet stretched between them, broken only by the creek and the wind in the trees. Finally, she nodded. "Fine." He helped her onto his horse and led it on foot, walking beside her like he had all the time in the world. They did not speak much as the miles passed. The sun dipped low, and the stars blinked into place above. They made camp beneath a grove of cottonwoods. Fletcher built a fire and handed her a tin cup of coffee without a word. She sat wrapped in a wool blanket he had pulled from his saddlebag, her bones aching, watching the flames dance. Fletcher sat across from her, sharpening his knife by firelight. "You always help strangers?" she asked softly. "No," he said. "Only the ones who look like they have not been helped enough." She looked at him, really looked this time. His face was rough with wear lines at the corners of his eyes, sunburn along his cheekbones, but his gaze was kind, grounded. "Sure, you live alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Have since I came back from the war, built the place myself. It is quiet, suits me." "You were a soldier, Union, cavalry." She took a sip of the coffee. It tasted of smoke and something warm. After a long silence, she asked, "Why are you not married?" He met her eyes. "Never found someone I wanted to stay for." She looked away, unsure why that answer cut so deep. The next day, the trail turned steep, winding up through the hills. Tessa rode in silence, her body sore, her thoughts louder than ever. She had trusted once before and barely made it out alive. But Fletcher had not tried to touch her, had not pressed her with questions. He moved through the world like a man who had learned the worth of quiet. By dusk, they reached his homestead. It was tucked into a valley, a sturdy cabin weathered gray with a small barn and a fenced pasture where 2 horses grazed. Smoke curled from the chimney. It was simple but strong, like him. He helped her down from the saddle and showed her inside. The room he gave her was plain, clean linens, a small window, a wooden dresser. She stood there a long time, staring at the bed. "You can lock the door if it helps," he said from behind her. She turned. "I do not think you will hurt me." He looked surprised at that. Then he nodded once and stepped back. "Supper is in an hour." She did not sleep that night. Too many memories crawled through her mind. But she listened to the quiet creak of the cabin, the wind against the windows, the steady sounds of Fletcher moving around at dawn. Days passed. She learned the rhythm of the place. Fletcher rose early, worked hard, said little. But he always brought her coffee in the morning and left a plate for her at dinner, even if she did not join him. He never asked about her past, never pressed. One afternoon, she helped him mend a fence. Her hands were blistered by the end of it, but she did not complain. He handed her a cool canteen and said, "You work harder than most men I have hired." "I am not most men." "No," he said, looking at her. "You are not." Later, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun settle over the hills, she asked, "Why me?" Fletcher turned to her. His eyes were soft, steady. "Because you are the first thing that felt like home." She blinked, breath caught in her chest. No one had ever said something like that to her. No one had ever looked at her like that with hope. She looked away, heart thudding. "I do not know what to do with that," she whispered. "You do not have to do anything, just stay." She did stay, and the fear began to fade. The garden behind the cabin was overgrown, but rows still held their shape under the weeds. Fletcher stood at the edge with a spade in one hand, turning the soil where stiff stalks of last year's corn had withered. Tessa watched from the porch, sleeves rolled to the elbows, a needle paused in the hem of a cotton shirt she was mending for him. "You're planting late," she said. He glanced up, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. "Don't plan to sell." "Just enough for the two of us to eat come fall." She nodded, threading the needle again. "I can help. You know your way around a garden, better than I knew my way around a husband." That drew a soft sound from him, not quite a laugh, but a breath lighter than his usual silence. She didn't smile back. She didn't know how to, not yet. But the stitch in her hem came easier. By late afternoon, she was down in the dirt beside him, sleeves stained and knees sore. He handed her seed potatoes, and she spaced them without needing to ask how far. He didn't speak much while they worked, but he moved so she always had shade when she needed it, passed her water without being asked. They ended the day with dirt under their nails and a row of turned beds behind them. Fletcher leaned on the spade, watching the sky edge toward dusk. "You ever think of leaving Montana?" she asked. "I did once, after the war." He wiped his brow with the crook of his arm. "Rode south, made it as far as Kansas. Thought if I kept riding, I'd outrun what I'd seen." "And did you?" He shook his head. "No place quiets a man's ghosts. But this land's wide enough to carry them without drowning in them." Tessa sat back on her heels. "I thought about heading west, Oregon maybe, fresh start, but I never liked the sea." "You don't have to run anymore," he said, not looking at her. "You can just be here." The words settled around her like warm wool. That night, she found herself standing in the doorway of the cabin's small kitchen, watching him slice dried venison for stew. His movements were steady, practiced. He didn't speak, just nodded at the chair beside the hearth. She sat. The fire crackled low and steady. A pot simmered on the hook, scented with thyme and onion. Outside, a coyote called once, far off. "You ever miss it?" she asked, eyes on the flames. "Company, more than one voice in a day." He stirred the pot. "Used to." "Got used to the quiet." "I'm not much for talk, Fletcher." "I know," he said. "That's why I like having you here." Her heart beat a little harder against her ribs. She turned her face toward the fire so he wouldn't see it in her expression. After supper, she washed the dishes while he banked the coals. When she passed him the last tin plate, their hands touched, just briefly. His thumb grazed hers. Neither of them moved away. She didn't say anything, just dried her hands on her skirt and stepped outside. The stars were out, bright and sharp against the black. She leaned on the porch rail, listening to the wind in the cottonwoods. The door opened behind her. His boots were quiet on the planks. "You sleep at all?" he asked. "Some." He came to stand beside her. They didn't touch, but the warmth of him was close, steady. "I keep thinking," she said, "if I hadn't gone down to that creek, if you hadn't been crossing that ridge that day." "I was supposed to be on the other side of the valley," he said. "Horse through a shoe. Took a different trail." Tessa looked down at her hands. "You believe in fate." "I believe in timing," he said. "And gut." "And what did your gut say when you saw me?" He was quiet for a long moment, then told me I'd found something I didn't know I needed. She turned to look at him. He didn't glance away. "You don't scare easy," she said. "No," he answered. "But I scare true." She stepped closer, just enough for her hand to brush his against the porch rail. I don't know what I'm supposed to be anymore, she said. You don't have to be anything but here, he said. With me, she exhaled, slow and unsteady. You're not afraid I'll leave, are you? I don't know, she whispered. Then I'll wait, he said. As long as it takes. The moon climbed higher. She looked at him, and something inside her, something buried deep, unfolded just a little. She didn't reach for him, but she didn't move away either, and that was something. By late September, the days shortened and the wind changed. Dawn came slow and gold over the valley, and the edges of the cottonwoods turned the color of papered flame. The warmth lingered, but the soil had cooled, and Fletcher's hand ached when he gripped the axe too long. Tessa noticed it one morning as he split kindling near the barn, his knuckles stiff, jaw set against the pull of old pain. She set the basket of eggs on the porch rail and stepped down. That wrist bothering you, he worked another log clean through before answering, comes and goes when the air turns. She took the axe from him without asking and set the next log on the stump. Show me how you hold it. He watched her hands, not her face. Grip it higher. You've got smaller arms, less swing, more control. She adjusted, then brought the blade down. It struck off center, lodging halfway deep. Again, he said, stepping closer but not reaching in. Let it fall, don't fight it. By mid-morning, a neat stack of wood rose beside the porch and her arms trembled from the work. He handed her a cup of water and their fingers brushed. She didn't step back. You ever think of teaching? She asked, wiping her brow. He leaned against the porch post. Tried once. One of the neighbor boys, his folks, asked me to show him how to ride. He fell, blamed me, never asked again. You're patient, she said. Would have made a good schoolmaster if things had been different. I don't have letters enough for that. You read fine, she said. You read to me that first week when I couldn't sleep. He looked at her then, a slow stillness in his eyes. You remember that. I remember everything, she said. The way you made space without asking why I needed it. He didn't answer right away. She didn't press. Later, she found a scrap of canvas and stitched it into a sling for his wrist. He grumbled, but wore it. She didn't tell him it made her feel steadier, doing something that mattered. They began harvesting the last of the squash and maize. Tessa dried herbs in bunches over the stove while Fletcher smoked meat in the lean-to behind the barn. Their days followed the sun, and the silence between them grew full, not empty. One evening, as she shelled beans by lantern light, she asked, "Did you ever want children?" He set the ledger aside slowly. "I did, once, before everything changed." She nodded, focused on the rhythm of her hands. "I lost one, years ago. Before we came west." He didn't speak, but his stillness changed, not tighter, just more present. "I never told anyone," she said, "not even him. He'd already stopped looking at me like I was real." "I'm sorry," Fletcher said. "It wasn't your sorrow to carry. Don't matter." "I'll carry it anyway." She blinked hard, then set the bowl aside and stood. The lantern threw soft light across his face. She crossed the room, stood before him. "I haven't let anyone touch me without fear since," she said. "I won't ask for more than you give." She reached out and touched his sleeve, just above the elbow. Her hand stayed there. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "Not anymore." He looked at her like she was something rare, something he'd found after years of not looking. "Then stay." "I already have." Their first kiss was quiet, like the rest of them, honest, slow, and without demand. Just breathe and warmth and the steady, grounding presence of something that didn't ask her to be anything but herself. That night, she lay beside him in the narrow bed, the window open to the rustle of leaves. His arm rested beneath her shoulders, her hand curled against his chest. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. In the morning, she rose before him, fed the hens, and stirred cornmeal into a pot on the stove. He came in with dew on his boots, hair tousled from sleep, and smiled when he saw her there. She turned, wooden spoon in hand. "What? That," he said, stepping close to press his lips to her temple. "That's what home's supposed to feel like." The first hard frost came overnight, laying silver across the fields. Fletcher rose early, breath clouding in the cabin's chill as he fed the fire back to life. Tessa came in from the barn with a pail of milk, cheeks pink from the cold, sleeves damp at the cuffs. "You'll need to start wearing gloves," he said, setting a kettle over the flames. "They slow me down," she replied, rubbing her hands briskly. "You'll freeze your fingers off before Christmas." She looked at him then, eyes steady. "You gonna start fussing over me now?" He folded his arms. "I might." She didn't answer, but her mouth twitched at the corner before she turned to strain the milk. Later, as they worked side by side sealing the windows with oiled cloth and strips of muslin, she asked, "You ever have neighbors up here? Used to be a family 2 ridges over. Old man died in the winter of '69. Widow moved back east with her sister. No one else since," he shook his head. "Most folks don't stay long, land's too quiet for some, too hard for others." Her hands paused. "And for you, I don't mind the work, or the quiet. Just didn't know how much I'd missed having someone to share it with." She didn't speak for a while, just kept tacking cloth along the sill. That afternoon, a rider came up the trail. Fletcher stepped out with his rifle resting loose in one hand, but the man wore the badge of a county deputy and rode with the weary posture of one who'd been in the saddle since dawn. The deputy dismounted and tipped his hat. "Rowe, heard you knew the back trails better than most. Got 3 cattle missing off the Hollies ranch. Prince went east, but the snow'll cover them by morning." Fletcher nodded slowly. "I can look." The deputy's eyes slid toward the porch, where Tessa stood with a hand braced on the rail. "New hand." Fletcher didn't look away. "She's mine." The deputy gave a short nod and mounted up. "You find anything, ride in." They watched him go until the pines swallowed the sound of hooves. Tessa crossed her arms. "You didn't need to say that." "I wanted to." She stepped down, boots crunching frost. "You think I'm yours?" He met her gaze. "Only if you want it." She studied him for a long breath before reaching out and sliding her hand into his. "I do." That night, she carved her name into the inside of a kitchen drawer just above his. The cabin had been his, but now it was theirs. By the next week, snow came in earnest. They moved the chickens to the shed and stacked firewood high along the north wall. Fletcher taught her how to trap rabbit using wire and pine boughs. She taught herself how to stretch a deer hide smooth across the smoke rack. One morning she found him on the porch, boot pulled off, sock bloodied at the toe. "You step on something. Piece of glass in the barn," he muttered. She crouched without a word, lifted his foot into her lap, and cleaned the wound with boiled water and whiskey. He winced once, but didn't pull away. "You're lucky it didn't go deeper," she said, wrapping the cloth firm. "I'd have managed." She looked up at him. "You don't have to anymore." His breath caught just a little. She kept her hands on his ankle until the knot was tied. Later that evening, as snow thickened outside and the fire burned low, she sat with him on the floor beside the stove, her head resting against his shoulder. He traced the shape of her hand with his thumb, slow and quiet. "You were married before," he said. She didn't move. "I was." He waited. He had charm when there was something he wanted. When he didn't, he had fists. Fletcher's jaw shifted, but he stayed still. "I thought I had no worth left after that. No voice, no place. You were wrong." She turned her face to his shoulder. "I know that now. I would have waited longer," he said. "If you needed. I think I needed you not to wait." He tipped her chin up, and this time she kissed him first. Snow fell into silence outside the windows. Inside, the warmth held. In that small cabin, built by a man who once believed he'd live alone forever, something new settled in deep and sure, not a rescue, not a debt, just love, hard-earned and true. By mid-November, the valley lay hushed beneath a clean sheet of snow, the kind that muffled steps and turned the world soft around the edges. Fletcher had just come in from checking the fence line, boots laced tight with frost clinging to the creases. Tessa stood at the table, hands dusted with flour, shaping dough into rounds beside the stove. He stamped off the snow and hung his coat near the fire. North corners holding fine, no signs of drift or break. She didn't look up. "That's the 3rd time you've gone to check it this week." He crossed the room, pulled a chair out and sat. "Weather's been shifting. I don't like guessing." She handed him a round of dough. "Then stop guessing and help." He pressed his thumb into the center of the biscuit, quiet for a moment. "You ever think about staying here? Past the winter?" She brushed hair from her cheek with her wrist. "You asking if I plan to leave? I'm asking if you want this to be your life." She glanced over, eyes clear. "It already is." He didn't reply, just reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm from the fire. She let him hold it. That evening, after supper, she pulled a small cedar box from the bottom drawer of the cupboard. Without a word, she set it on the table between them and opened the lid. Inside lay a folded piece of cloth and a thin silver brooch shaped like a swallow in flight. "My mother's," she said. "I buried it under a floorboard the night before I left Missouri. Told myself if I ever felt safe again, I'd go back for it." He looked at her, understanding dawning without needing to be spoken. "I sent a letter with a rider 2 months ago," she continued. "Had it delivered to a woman who helped me once. She found it." "Why give it to me?" he asked. "I'm not," she said, "but I want you to see it. It's the only thing I ever kept that meant something before everything went wrong." He reached out and folded the cloth back over it. "Then we'll keep it here, where it belongs." The next morning, she found him out by the pasture, hammering a new crossbeam into the gate. She leaned on the fence, breath curling in the air. "You always fix things before they break. Try to," he said. "Some things can't be mended once they go." She folded her arms against the cold. "I've been thinking about spring." He looked up. "What about it? You've got space behind the barn. Enough for a second cabin, maybe even a bigger one, if you wanted." He straightened. "You planning to build?" "I'm saying I want to stay, not just through the snow, for good." He wiped his hands and came to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing hers beneath their coats. "You sure?" "I'm not someone who makes promises easy," she said. "But I've worked this land with you, bled and buried things here. I've stood in the silence and didn't feel alone. That's more than I've ever had." He took her gloved hand in his. "Then stay, Tessa, not just in the cabin, stay with me," she nodded once. "I already told you I would. I'm just saying it again." They were married 2 weeks later. The preacher rode up from the next ridge, a quiet man with a voice like gravel and a Bible worn thin from use. They stood in front of the hearth, boots clean, faces wind-burned but steady. Tessa wore a navy wool dress she'd mended herself, and Fletcher shaved for the first time in a month. There were no vows beyond the simple ones. To keep each other, to share the work, to walk forward together. She didn't cry. He didn't stumble. When the preacher left, she hung the swallow brooch on a nail above the door. The rest of the winter passed in a rhythm that felt earned, hauling water from the creek, mending harness straps, reading aloud by lamplight when the nights stretched long. She began stitching a quilt from scraps of their old clothes. He carved her a small box for her sewing needles, each corner smoothed and sanded. Come March, she planted the first row of onions beside the cabin, hands in the thawed soil, knees damp. He leaned on the fence and watched her work, the light catching the silver pin above the door. By June, the valley bloomed. Fletcher built a new porch on the south side, wide enough for 2 chairs and a table. Tessa brought out a jar of blackberry preserves she'd bartered for with a passing peddler, and they sat there watching the sun sink behind the ridgeline. "You ever think about what you'd have done if we hadn't met?" she asked. He took a sip of coffee. "I'd have kept going." "But I wouldn't have lived," she nodded slowly. "I think I would have stopped running, but I'd have done it alone." He reached across the table, took her hand. "We don't have to wonder anymore." She gripped his fingers, calloused and warm. "No. We don't." That night, after everything was quiet and the lamp had been turned down, she lay beside him, her face tucked into the hollow of his shoulder. "I never thought I'd be happy," she said. "You didn't know what it looked like yet," he whispered. She smiled against his skin. "Now I do." And in the deep hush of the Montana dark, with the fire low and the earth full of spring, they slept the sleep of people who had found home in land, in labor, and in each other. Forever.